Today, we're diving into a really dramatic claim from the U.S. They're saying that China has basically just declared an all-out economic war on the United States, with one single goal, to completely dethrone the US dollar.
Yeah, the source is not mincing words here. They're framing a recent announcement out of Beijing as way more than just a policy change. They see it as the first shot in a massive battle for who controls the global economy. And the main target? The absolute foundation of American power, the dollar itself.
So to really wrap our heads around how huge this claim is, we first need to understand what's actually at stake. And that all starts with this idea of a global reserve currency.
So what is a reserve currency? Well, think of it as the world's go-to, default money. When countries trade big-ticket items with each other, we're talking oil, gas, you name it, they usually use a single trusted currency. And whichever country owns that currency gets a ton of economic and political power.
And this isn't anything new. For the better part of a century, really, the US dollar has been the bedrock of the entire global financial system. Almost every major international deal, from buying a tanker of oil to settling massive debts, has been priced in good old American dollars.
The source video uses this quote, which they attribute to Donald Trump, to really hammer this point home. The dollar's top dog status isn't just about money, it is directly plugged into America's position as a global superpower. And according to this analysis, that is precisely what China is aiming for.
Okay, so this is the big question, right? How exactly does China plan to pull this off? Well, the source lays out what it describes as a super calculated, multi-step strategy to slowly but surely tear down the dollar's dominance and put their own currency, the yuan, in its place.
All right, let's break down this four-part plan. First up, get countries to trade for major stuff like oil and gas using the yuan, which lets them bypass the dollar completely. Second, buy up tons and tons of gold to back the yuan and make it seem more stable and trustworthy. Third, convince their friends and allies, like the BRICS nations, to start holding yuan in their reserves instead of dollars. And finally, offer loans and sell goods directly in yuan, which gets more and more countries to rely less on the dollar.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. The source argues that China's less than transparent financial system is actually a strategic advantage in this fight. See, the US system is open, but that also means America can use it to hit countries with sanctions. They can literally freeze payments. China's system, on the other hand, is much murkier and harder to track. This makes it, as the source puts it, a sanction-proof alternative for any country trying to get out from under America's financial thumb.
And you have to understand, according to the source, this isn't some overnight coup. No, this is the long game. The video lays out a timeline of maybe 10, even 15 years for the yuan to make a real run at this, potentially grabbing over half of the global reserve market. And in their words, that would truly mark the end of America's economic power as we know it.
But here's the twist. The source argues that this long-term strategy is about to get a massive, and I mean massive, kickstart from a potential flashpoint, a war between the US and Iran.
So why now? The timing of China's announcement is presented as absolutely not a coincidence. The source claims it's been deliberately timed to match the rising tensions in the Middle East, arguing that China sees a potential conflict as the perfect chance to hit the accelerator on its economic plans.
The logic laid out here is pretty stark. A long, messy war would just drain American money and resources. The source points to Iran's military tech, supposedly backed by China, saying it could do real damage. All that chaos and the image of a struggling America would, in this view, create a global panic, sending countries running from the dollar and searching for a safer alternative, like the yuan.
This quote really just captures the whole dramatic conclusion the source is drawing here. It paints a picture of Iran as the military weapon that brings America down, with China waiting in the wings to deliver the final economic blow.
So let's just imagine for a second that this plan, turbocharged by a war, just as the source describes, actually works. What would that world even look like?
This chart illustrates the endgame perfectly, according to the source. We're not talking about sharing the top spot. We're talking about a complete flip, a total reordering of the global financial system where the yuan takes the dollar's place, effectively shifting the center of economic power from Washington straight to Beijing.
But let's pump the brakes a bit. Even the source admits this is not a guaranteed win for China. They point out that there are some pretty big hurdles the yuan has to clear before anyone would see it as a true replacement for the dollar.
At the end of the day, global finance all comes down to one thing: trust. And the source makes it clear that for the yuan to really take over, China has to convince the world's investors that their money is safe. And that means you need things like transparency, a justice system you can rely on, and an open financial network, all things the US dollar system has going for it right now.
So, after all that, we're left with this huge question. The source presents a vision of a world on the very edge of a massive power shift, where a war in one part of the world could trigger a complete economic reset. All the pieces are on the board, but whether this vision of a yuan-led world ever actually happens, well, that remains the big, high-stakes question.